The Untamed Wilds of Arizona Territory, 1885, a land where justice hangs by a thread and survival demands sacrifice. When Sheriff Marshal Hayes's daughter disappears at the hands of the most notorious bandits in the territory, her fate seems sealed. But in this harsh land where blood feuds run deeper than canyons, an unlikely alliance forms. An Apache tracker named Nakohe, cast out from his tribe for questioning ancient customs, becomes her only hope for survival. Two worlds collide in a desperate race against time across merciless terrain, where every choice carries the weight of life and death. This is a tale of courage that defies boundaries, proving that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the shadows of hatred. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The town of Copper Ridge emerged from the rugged Arizona landscape, like an afterthought. A collection of sun-bleached buildings clinging to existence beneath the merciless southwestern sky. A single dirt road carved through its center, connecting the general store, saloon, blacksmith, and the modest white steepled church that served as the town's fragile claim to civilization. At the edge of town stood the sheriff's office, a sturdy adobe structure with iron bars on its windows and a faded American flag hanging limply in the still summer air. Inside, Sheriff Marshal Hayes sat at his desk, running a weathered hand through his salt and pepper hair. The deep creases etched into his face told stories of 12 harsh years upholding the law in a place where justice often came from the business end of a Colt revolver. His grey eyes, still sharp as a hawk's, scanned the telegram in his hands for the third time, his jaw tightening at its contents. "Another raid," he muttered, setting the paper down and reaching for his coffee. "Fourth ranch this month." His deputy, Thomas Reed, a lanky young man with earnest eyes and too little experience, shifted uncomfortably against the doorframe. "The Patterson place was hit badly, Sheriff. Took near everything of value and left 2 hands wounded. Mr. Patterson swears. It was the Donovan gang again." Hayes nodded grimly. The Donovan gang had been terrorizing settlements across 2 territories, robbing stagecoaches, looting ranches, and leaving nothing but suffering in their wake. What had started as small-time robberies had escalated into something far more deadly. 6 people died in the last year alone. "They're getting bolder," Hayes said, rising from his chair, "and closer to town." The door swung open, letting in a flood of golden afternoon light and the sound of approaching horses. Catherine Hayes stepped inside, her chestnut hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat, her riding skirt dusty from the trail. At 21, she had her mother's delicate features, but carried herself with a confidence that made the local men both intimidated and smitten. "Pa," she said, removing her gloves, "Mrs. Wilson says the supply wagon is 4 days late. She's worried about her medicine." Sheriff Hayes sighed. "Likely delayed at Fort Buchanan. I'll send a wire." Catherine nodded, reaching for the water dipper. "I saw riders out by Sidewinder Gulch, 3 of them heading east toward the Anderson Ranch. One of them had a bandana over his face." The sheriff and his deputy exchanged glances. "Kate," Hayes said, his voice adopting the tone that brooked no argument, "I want you staying close to town for the next few days." She set down the water dipper with more force than necessary. "Pa, I'm not a child. The Andersons need those medicines, and with the supply wagon delayed—" "It's not up for debate," Hayes cut in. "The Donovan gang doesn't take kindly to witnesses." He reached for his gun belt, strapping it around his waist. "Thomas and I will ride out to Anderson Place. You stay with Sarah at the general store until I get back." Catherine's expression hardened, a look her father knew all too well. She had her mother's stubbornness, God rest her soul. 9 years since typhoid had taken Elizabeth Hayes, and still her daughter stood with the same tilt of the chin when challenged. "Fine," she conceded through her eyes. "I'll help Sarah with inventory. As Catherine left, Sheriff Hayes turned to his deputy. "Saddle the horses. We leave in 10 minutes." Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty street. Catherine walked briskly toward the general store, her mind already forming a plan. She would wait until her father was well on his way before retrieving her own horse. From the livery, the Anderson family had a sick child, and Mrs. Anderson was expecting. They needed those medicines, and Catherine knew the shortcut through Rattlesnake Pass that would get her there faster than her father's more cautious route. Unknown to the sheriff and his daughter, other eyes watched the town of Copper Ridge. From the cover of mesquite trees that dotted the surrounding hills, a solitary figure observed the movement of people through a brass spyglass. Nakohe, his black hair tied back with a strip of leather, lowered the spyglass and frowned. The man's face was angular, marked with 3 parallel scars that ran from cheekbone to jaw, evidence of a life lived on the edge of 2 worlds. Born to an Apache mother and raised within the tribe until age 14, Nakohe had been captured during a cavalry raid and eventually placed with a missionary family. He had returned to Arizona 5 years later, fluent in English and forever changed, belonging fully to neither world. Now he lived in the spaces between, tracking game for ranchers who would pay him and avoiding the growing tensions between settlers and his mother's people. Lately, his tracking skills had been focused on a different kind of prey. The Donovan gang had struck his employer's ranch twice, and the old rancher, William Crawford, was one of the few men who treated Nakohe with respect rather than suspicion. Crawford had promised him a parcel of land along the creek if he could help stop the bandits, land of his own, a dream Nakohe had scarcely allowed himself to consider. The sun was beginning to set when Nakohe spotted a lone rider emerging from town. Even at this distance, he recognized the sheriff's daughter heading not toward the safety of any nearby ranch, but toward the high country where the bandits were rumored to camp. He cursed under his breath, knowing the foolishness of such a journey. As twilight deepened, Catherine Hayes urged her dappled mare faster along the narrow trail that cut through Rattlesnake Pass. The medicine bag bounced against her saddle, its contents carefully packed by the shopkeeper. She calculated she could reach the Anderson ranch before dark, deliver the medicine, and be back in town before her father returned from his patrol. What she didn't see was the dust cloud rising behind her. Nor did she hear the approaching riders, until it was too late. 3 men on horseback appeared suddenly from a hidden ravine, cutting off her path forward and back. Catherine reined her horse to a sudden stop, her heart hammering against her ribs as she recognized the leader. Jackson, Donovan himself, his bearded face twisted in a malicious grin. "Well now," Donovan drawled, tipping his hat with mock courtesy, "if it ain't the sheriff's daughter all alone in these dangerous hills." His eyes, cold as winter frost, assessed her with calculated interest. "Boys, I believe our luck just changed. Seems we found some mighty valuable insurance." As the bandits closed in around her, Catherine reached for the small derringer hidden in her boot. But Donovan was faster. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with bruising force. "That ain't polite, Miss Hayes," he said, twisting until she cried out, and the small gun fell to the dirt. "Now you're going to come along nice and quiet-like. Your pa's been causing us no end of trouble, and I reckon having his precious daughter as our guest might convince him to turn a blind eye next time we pass through." From his hidden position among the rocks above, Nakohe watched the encounter unfold with growing alarm. 1 against 3 were poor odds, but the alternatives were worse. He notched an arrow, drew his bowstring taut, and took careful aim. The first arrow struck with deadly precision, embedding itself in the shoulder of the bandit, reaching for Catherine's reins. The man howled in pain, nearly falling from his horse. Before the others could react, a second arrow whistled through the air, piercing the hat of another rider. Chaos erupted. Donovan fired wildly toward the rocks, while the wounded man struggled to control his panicking horse. Catherine seized the moment, kicking her mare into motion, but Donovan was too quick. He spurred his horse forward, cutting off her escape and grabbing her forcefully by the arm. "You're not going anywhere," he snarled, dragging her from her saddle. As his men returned fire toward their unseen attacker, "Boys, grab her! We're leaving now!" As the bandits thundered away with Catherine struggling in their grasp, Nakohe slipped silently back to where his Mustang waited. The sun had almost disappeared beyond the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood red. The hunt had begun. Darkness fell across the Arizona territory like a heavy blanket, bringing with it a silence broken only by the pounding of hooves against hard-packed earth. Jackson Donovan led his gang deeper into the wilderness, pushing their horses to a punishing pace. Catherine, bound and thrown across Donovan's saddle like cargo, struggled to breathe with each jarring stride. The medicine bag she'd been carrying was gone, lost somewhere on the trail during the ambush. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Faster," Donovan barked at his men. "That Apache will track us if we don't make the canyon by midnight." The wounded bandit, a man with a pockmarked face named Becker, groaned as he clutched his shoulder. "I need the arrow out, Jackson. I'm bleeding bad." "You'll live," Donovan said without sympathy, "or you won't. Either way, we ain't stopping till we're clear." The terrain grew steeper, forcing the horses to slow their pace. Catherine used the opportunity to take stock of her surroundings, memorizing landmarks despite the darkness. The North Star glimmered overhead. They were heading southwest, deeper into the mountain range that locals called the Devil's Backbone, for the jagged peaks that resembled vertebrae against the sky. Meanwhile, Sheriff Hayes and Deputy Reed arrived at the Anderson Ranch to find the family unharmed but frightened by recent visits from strangers asking about their livestock and property boundaries. They weren't typical bandits, Mr. Anderson explained, standing on his porch with a shotgun cradled in his arms. Too well-dressed, asked a lot of questions about who owns what around here. Hayes frowned. "Sounds like they're planning something, bigger than just stealing a few cattle and valuables." As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Anderson appeared at the door, her expression concerned. "Sheriff, did Catherine bring our medicine? The baby's cough is worse." Hayes felt his blood run cold. "Catherine's in town, ma'am. She hasn't been by." The couple exchanged worried glances. "We thought she always brings our supplies when the wagon's late." Without another word, Hayes mounted his horse, fear clawing at his throat. "Thomas, ride back to town. Check if she's there. I'll follow." The ridge trail. It's the shortcut she'd have taken. As they galloped in opposite directions, the first drops of rain began to fall from the gathering clouds, washing away tracks and dimming hope with each passing minute. Back in the mountains, the Donovan gang had reached a narrow canyon where limestone walls towered on either side, creating a natural fortress. They made camp in a large cave halfway up the eastern wall, accessible only by a treacherous switchback trail. Inside, the remnants of previous stays were evident: a stone fire ring, stacked firewood, and crude sleeping pallets. 2 more men waited at the camp, the rest of Donovan's gang. They jumped to their feet as the riders approached, hands on their weapons, until they recognized their leader. "You're late," said a tall man with a silver star pinned mockingly to his vest, a trophy taken from a marshal he'd killed the previous year. His eyes narrowed when he spotted Catherine. "What the hell, Jackson? You brought a woman?" Donovan dismounted, dragging Catherine roughly to her feet. "Not just any woman, Vance. Meet Miss Catherine Hayes, daughter of the illustrious Sheriff of Copper Ridge." Vance's expression shifted from annoyance to calculating interest. "Insurance. Smart." Donovan grinned, shoving Catherine toward the cave. "And bait." Inside the cave, they bound Catherine to a support post, her hands tied behind her back. The wounded man, Becker, collapsed nearby, his face pale and sweating as another bandit worked to remove the arrow from his shoulder. His screams echoed through the canyon when they finally yanked it free. Catherine watched in horrified fascination as blood poured from the wound. "He needs a doctor," she said, addressing no one in particular. "That needs to be cleaned and stitched properly." Donovan crouched before her, his breath hot on her face. "Are you offering your services, Miss Hayes?" She met his gaze steadily. "I assist our town doctor sometimes." "I can help him if you untie me." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Donovan's face. "Pretty and useful. Ain't that something?" He gestured to one of his men. "Cut her hands free, but keep a gun on her. She tries anything, shoot her in the foot." With her hands unbound, Catherine moved carefully to the wounded man's side. Someone brought her a canteen of water and a relatively clean shirt to use as bandages. She worked methodically, cleaning the wound as best she could with the limited supplies. "Why are you doing this?" she asked Donovan quietly as she worked. "Robbing ranches is one thing, but kidnapping? The cavalry will hunt you down for this." Donovan laughed, the sound echoing off the stone walls. "You think this is about ranch raids, sweetheart? The raids are just the beginning." Vance stepped forward, shooting Donovan a warning look. "Shut your mouth, Jackson." But Donovan was enjoying Catherine's attention too much to stop. "See, there's a copper mine opening up, and certain parcels of land are about to become very valuable, land that belongs to simple folk who might be persuaded to sell cheap if they're suffering from, say, mysterious raids or tragic accidents." Catherine's hands stilled. "You're working for someone." "Smart girl," Donovan said, ignoring Vance's glare. "Let's just say there are powerful men in Tucson who don't like waiting for progress, men who pay well for results." As the night wore on, the storm intensified. Rain lashed against the canyon walls, turning the dusty ground into slick mud. Sheriff Hayes followed his daughter's trail as far as Rattlesnake Pass before the rain washed away all signs of her passage. Soaked to the skin and increasingly desperate, he found her derringer lying in the mud, proof of his worst fears. He was examining the ground for any remaining tracks when a shadow materialized from the darkness. Hayes drew his revolver with lightning speed, aiming at the figure approaching through the rain. "That's far enough," he commanded. The figure stopped, raising empty hands. "Sheriff Hayes," a deep voice called over the storm. "I know where they've taken your daughter." Hayes squinted through the downpour. "Step closer, slow." The man advanced, and Hayes recognized him, the Apache tracker who sometimes worked for the ranches north of town. "Nakohe," he said, lowering his gun slightly. "What? Do you know about my daughter?" "I saw the abduction," Nakohe replied, rainwater streaming down his scarred face. "Donovan and his men took her west toward Devil's Backbone. They're holed up in Ghost Canyon." Hayes's grip tightened on his weapon. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I put an arrow in one of them trying to stop it," Nakohe answered simply, "and because I know that canyon better than anyone alive. You'll never find it without me, especially in this storm." The sheriff hesitated only briefly. "If you're lying—" "I'm not," Nakohe interrupted, "but we must hurry. Donovan didn't take her for ransom. Something else is happening." Miles away in the canyon, Catherine finished bandaging Becker's shoulder. She'd managed to stop the bleeding, but infection was already setting in. Without proper medicine, his chances were poor. "Thank you," Becker whispered when she gave him water. "I got a wife in Tucson, a little boy." "Shut up, Becker," Vance snapped from across the cave. Catherine used the momentary distraction to scan the cave, counting men and weapons, noting the single entrance. 5 men total, all armed. The odds were impossible. Donovan grabbed her arm, pulling her away from Becker. "Your nursing duties are done." He retied her hands, this time in front, but left her legs free. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a big day for you." "What happens tomorrow?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Donovan's grin sent ice through her veins. Tomorrow your daddy gets a message, a piece of his precious daughter. Maybe an ear or a finger, just enough to convince him to look the other way while we finish our business." Outside, the storm raged on, thunder cracking like gunshots against the canyon walls. As lightning briefly illuminated the landscape, a solitary figure watched the cave entrance from the shadows of a juniper grove across the canyon. Nakohe had left the sheriff to gather reinforcements while he went ahead to scout. The Apache tracker's eyes narrowed as he counted the guards, 2 men at the cave entrance taking shelter under an overhanging rock. The storm would provide cover, but scaling those wet rocks would be treacherous. He settled into wait, a plan already forming in his mind. Dawn was still hours away, but when it came, blood would follow. The storm subsided just before dawn, leaving behind a world transformed. Muddy rivulets cascaded down the canyon walls, and the air hung heavy with the scent of wet sage and pine. Inside the cave, Catherine awoke with a jolt as rough hands shook her shoulder. "Up!" ordered Vance, his face grim in the fading firelight. "We're moving!" Catherine's muscles screamed in protest as she was pulled to her feet. She had spent the night huddled against the cold stone, sleep coming in fitful bursts between planning, escape routes that never materialized. "What about Becca?" she asked, nodding toward the wounded man who lay still, his breathing shallow and labored. Vance's expression hardened. "Becca ain't coming." A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the morning air. She watched as Donovan crouched beside the dying man, speaking too quietly for her to hear. Becca's eyes widened momentarily before Donovan pressed a pillow over his face. His legs kicked once, twice, then stilled. "No!" Catherine lunged forward but was yanked back by Vance's iron grip. "That's mercy!" Vance hissed in her ear. "Infection would have taken him slow. Be grateful we ain't as cruel as you think." Outside the cave, the remaining men had already packed the horses. Catherine was ushered down the treacherous switchback path, her bound hands making balance nearly impossible on the slick rocks. One misstep would send her plummeting to the canyon floor. "Where are we going?" she demanded, as Donovan roughly hoisted her onto his horse. He smiled, tying her wrists to the saddle horn. "Higher country. Your daddy's too good a tracker to stay put." He swung up behind her, his arms snaking around her waist. "Besides, we've got a schedule to keep." The gang set off in a tight formation, winding through the narrow canyon floor before ascending a game trail so steep that the horses strained with every step. Catherine memorized each turn, each landmark, the split rock shaped like a wolf's head, the 3 lightning-struck juniper trees, the creek that flowed red with mineral deposits. If she escaped, this knowledge might save her life. Unknown to the bandits, Nakohe watched their departure from a high perch, noting their direction before slipping away to rendezvous with Sheriff Hayes. He moved like a shadow across the rugged terrain, reading signs invisible to untrained eyes. A displaced stone, bent grass, the subtle traces of 5 horses and 4 men. At the canyon's entrance, he found Hayes waiting with Deputy Reed and 4 grim-faced ranchers, all heavily armed. "They've moved out," Nakohe reported, crouching to examine fresh tracks heading northwest toward the high meadows. 4 men, 5 horses. Hayes's face paled. 4? There were 5. Nakohe nodded slowly. One did not leave the cave alive. The sheriff's hand tightened around his rifle. "Catherine, no," Nakohe said firmly. "A man. Your daughter rides with Donovan. She lives." One of the ranchers, a burly man named Phillips, spat into the dirt. "How do we know the Apache ain't leading us into a trap? Apache has been raiding homesteads too." Nakohe's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Enough, Phillips," Hayes said sharply. "Nakohe's the best tracker in the territory, and he's never given me reason to doubt him." He turned to the Apache. "Lead on." By midday, the Donovan gang had reached a high alpine meadow ringed by dense pine forest. A crude log cabin stood at its center, smoke curling from its stone chimney. A man emerged at their approach, rifle ready until he recognized Donovan. "You're late," called the man, a balding figure with a drooping mustache. "Mr. Hollister's man is already inside. He ain't happy." Donovan cursed under his breath, dismounting and pulling Catherine down after him. "Keep your mouth shut if you want to live through this," he warned, cutting the rope that bound her to the saddle, but leaving her hands tied. Inside the cabin, a well-dressed man in an expensive suit stood warming his hands by the fire. His trimmed beard and gold watch chain marked him as someone accustomed to luxuries rarely seen in these mountains. "Mr. Donovan," he said without turning, his accent revealing Eastern education. "Your telegram said you'd complete the Anderson and Wilson acquisitions by now. My employer is disappointed." "Got complicated," Donovan replied, pushing Catherine forward. "Sheriff Hayes has been snooping around, so we acquired some leverage instead." The man turned, his cold eyes appraising Catherine like merchandise. The sheriff's daughter, crude but potentially effective. He straightened his cuffs. "Nevertheless, Mr. Hollister expects results. The mining survey team arrives in 2 weeks. All properties in question must be secured by then." "They will be," Donovan assured him. "Hayes will back off once he gets a piece of his girl in the mail. The rest will sell when their cattle mysteriously disappear or their homes burn down." Catherine listened in horror as they casually discussed destroying her community's lives. "You won't get away with this," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "People won't sell just because—" The well-dressed man struck her across the face, the force of the blow sending her stumbling back. "People will do exactly as they're told when properly motivated, Miss Hayes, your father included." Blood trickled from her split lip as she glared at him. "Feisty," the man remarked to Donovan. "Ensure she remains alive until the properties are secured. Then dispose of her somewhere her father will never find her." He reached for his hat and gloves. "I'll inform Mr. Hollister of the adjustment to our timeline." After he departed, Donovan shoved Catherine into a small back room, barely large enough for a cot and a chamber pot. "Get comfortable," he said, closing the door. "You'll be here a while." Through the thin walls, she heard him instructing his men. 2 would ride to Copper Ridge with a message for her father. The others would stay to guard her while Donovan continued with their operation. Catherine sank onto the cot, the full weight of her situation crashing down. This wasn't just about robbery or even a simple kidnapping. Men like Hollister were stealing land for a copper mine, using Donovan's gang as their enforcers. People would lose everything: their homes, livelihoods, perhaps even their lives. She examined her surroundings, searching for anything that might serve as a weapon or tool. The window was small, but unbarred. The floorboards were old and possibly loose. The walls were solid log, but with chinking that might be worked free. Her hands twisted against the ropes, seeking weakness. Meanwhile, Sheriff Hayes's posse followed Nakohe through increasingly difficult terrain. The tracker moved with unerring precision, reading signs invisible to the others. A broken twig, a horseshoe print in a patch of mud, a tuft of horsehair caught on a branch. "How much further?" Hayes asked as they paused to rest the horses. "We're gaining," Nakohe replied, studying the sky. "But nightfall comes soon. In darkness, we risk losing their trail or riding into ambush." Deputy Reed, his young face streaked with dirt and worry, shifted nervously in his saddle. "Sheriff, if they hurt Catherine—" "They won't," Hayes said firmly, though his eyes betrayed his fear. "She's no use to them harmed." Phillips, the distrustful rancher, had been watching Nakohe closely throughout the day. Now he urged his horse closer to the tracker. "You ain't doing this out of the goodness of your heart, Apache. What's your game?" Nakohe continued, checking his horse's hooves, seemingly unperturbed by the accusation. "No game. Your people took my land. I take what work I can find." "There's more," Hayes said quietly, recognizing something in the tracker's demeanor. "You know something about Donovan you're not saying." A shadow passed over Nakohe's scared face. "Donovan and his men raided an Apache hunting party last winter, killed 4, including my brother. Their bodies were found mutilated." His voice remained even, betraying no emotion. "They will answer for this blood." The revelation hung in the air between them. The truth of Nakohe's involvement finally became clear. This wasn't just a job for him, it was vengeance. As dusk approached, the posse made camp in a sheltered gully, keeping their fire small and voices lower. In the growing darkness, Nakohe slipped away, moving silently toward the high meadow to scout ahead. What he discovered would change everything. Night fell over the high meadow, transforming the alpine landscape into a realm of deep shadows and silver moonlight. Nakohe crouched motionless among the pines, observing the cabin where Catherine was held. 2 guards patrolled outside, while occasional movements behind lit windows revealed at least 3 more men inside. The operation was larger than he had anticipated. From his hidden vantage point, Nakohe watched as a wagon arrived shortly before midnight. 2 men unloaded wooden crates, carrying them inside with careful precision. Weapons, perhaps, or explosives, tools of destruction meant for the homesteads that stood in Hollister's way. Retreating silently, Nakohe returned to the posse's camp and found Hayes still awake, staring into the dying embers of their small fire. "Well," the sheriff asked, tension evident in every line of his body. "The cabin is heavily guarded," Nakohe reported. "Your daughter is alive, kept in a back room. But there is more happening. A wagon brought supplies, crates that the men handled like they contained dynamite." Hayes's expression darkened. "Dynamite? What the hell are they planning?" A message arrived as well. 2 riders departed, heading east toward Copper Ridge. The sheriff stood abruptly. "We need to move now." Nakohe shook his head. "Attack now and your daughter dies first. The odds are poor, 7 men against our 6, with them holding defensible positions." "Then what do you suggest?" Hayes demanded, frustration bleeding into his voice. "I go alone," Nakohe said simply. "I can get closer than a group. Perhaps create an opportunity to speak with your daughter." Deputy Reed, who had been pretending to sleep nearby, sat up. "It's suicide." "It is necessary," Nakohe countered. "You follow at dawn, but stay hidden. Wait for my signal." Hayes studied the Apache tracker, searching his face for deception, but finding only determination. Finally, he nodded. "Do what you can. But understand this. If anything happens to my daughter, there won't be a place on Earth where you can hide from me." Nakohe accepted the threat with a slight inclination of his head before disappearing into the darkness. Inside her makeshift prison, Catherine worked a loose nail from the ancient bed frame, using it to slowly wear away at her bindings. Hours passed as she rubbed the rope against the nail's head, her wrists raw and bleeding from the effort. Just as the first thread snapped, the door swung open. Vance entered, carrying a tin plate of beans and a cup of water. "Dinner," he announced flatly, setting the items on the floor. Catherine quickly hid the nail beneath her leg, keeping her hands in front where he could see them, still apparently bound. She watched him warily, noting the way his gaze lingered on her face, where bruising had formed from the businessman's strike. "He shouldn't have hit you," Vance said unexpectedly. "That wasn't part of the plan." Catherine saw an opportunity. "What is the plan, Vance? Kill innocent farmers for copper money?" His expression hardened. "Ain't nobody innocent. Those farmers are sitting on land that's worth 50 times what they paid for it. So that justifies murder." Vance's hand moved to his gun. "Careful, girl. I said he shouldn't have hit you. Didn't say I wouldn't." Catherine changed tactics. "What's your cut of Hollister's money?" Enough to retire somewhere nice, or just enough to keep you doing his dirty work? Something flickered in Vance's eyes, doubt perhaps, or wounded pride. I get what's owed me. You get whatever scraps Donovan leaves you, she pressed, while men like Hollister get rich. Vance stepped closer, looming over her. You think you're smarter than me? Your daddy's badge won't protect you out here. My father will come for me, Catherine said with quiet certainty. And when he does, Hollister will disappear back east, leaving you to hang. The bandit's eyes narrowed dangerously. He reached down, suddenly grabbing her bound hands. Catherine's heart raced, certain he'd discovered her partially cut ropes. Instead, he produced a knife. You don't need these anymore, he said, slicing through her bindings. Not where you'll be sleeping tonight. Fear flooded her veins as Vance hauled her to her feet. He dragged her from the small room into the main cabin, where Donovan and 2 other men sat playing cards. A half-empty whiskey bottle stood at the center of the table. What's this? Donovan demanded, eyeing Vance suspiciously. She's trying to turn us against each other, Vance said, shoving Catherine forward, talking about Hollister and hanging. Donovan rose slowly, his movement deliberate, as a rattlesnake preparing to strike. That so? Catherine stood her ground, despite the terror building inside her. They'll hunt all of you down for what you're doing, not just my father, the cavalry. Once they learn about the copper scheme... The cabin fell silent as the men exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, Donovan laughed, though the sound held no humor. Boys, it seems the sheriff's daughter thinks we're just common criminals. He circled Catherine slowly. Tell me, Miss Hayes, what would you call men who kill for money? Dead men, she replied, lifting her chin defiantly. When justice catches... Up to you. Donovan's hand shot out, grabbing her throat. Justice, he snarled, his face inches from hers. There's no justice in this territory, only power and those smart enough to take it. Catherine clawed at his hand, struggling for breath, as spots danced before her eyes. Just as darkness began to close in, he released her. She collapsed to her knees, gasping. Take her to the cellar, Donovan ordered. Chain her to the wall. Tomorrow we will send her father a finger as a reminder of who holds the power here. Outside in the darkness, Nakohi had worked his way closer to the cabin, slipping past the guards with the stealth of a lifetime spent hunting. Now he crouched beneath the window, listening to Catherine's confrontation with the bandits. His hand tightened around his knife when he heard Donovan's threat. He watched as Vance and another man dragged Catherine across the room to a trap door on the floor. They descended with her into darkness, returning minutes later without her. She's secure, Vance reported, though she fought like a wildcat. Donovan nodded, returning to his cards. 2 of you sleep. The rest keep watch. Hollister's man will be back tomorrow, and I want good news for him. Nakohi retreated silently into the forest to consider his options. The cellar complicated matters. A direct assault would likely get Catherine killed before they could reach her. He needed another approach. An hour before dawn, as mist rose from the damp earth to shroud the meadow, Nakohi made his move. One guard had dozed off at his post while the other paced restlessly, stamping his feet against the cold. Neither noticed the shadow that slipped behind the cabin and pried open the small exterior doors that led to the cellar. Catherine huddled against the damp stone wall, one ankle shackled to an iron ring. The cellar smelled of earth and mold, the only light coming from thin cracks between the floorboards above. She'd almost freed herself from the rope bindings earlier. Now the situation was far worse. The iron shackle was secured with a padlock, the key undoubtedly with Donovan. A scraping sound drew her attention to the outside cellar doors. Her muscles tensed, ready to fight despite the hopelessness of her situation. The doors opened a crack, and a figure silhouetted against the fading night sky slipped inside. Miss Hayes, a deep voice whispered, do not be afraid. Catherine squinted through the darkness. Who's there? The figure moved closer, and she recognized the Apache tracker who sometimes came to town. "Nakohe?" He crouched beside her, examining. "The shackle. Your father is nearby with men, but attacking now would be dangerous for you." Hope surged within her. "They're planning something terrible. They have dynamite. They're going to force people off their land for the copper mine." Nakohe nodded grimly, working at the lock with a slender piece of metal. "I heard. 2 men have already ridden toward town. We must warn them. First we get you free." The lock clicked open and the shackle fell away. "Can you walk?" She rubbed her ankle, wincing. "Yes. What's your plan?" Nakohe's scared face revealed nothing. "We cannot leave undetected, so we must force them to move you." "How?" "Fire," he said simply, producing a small bundle from his pouch. "When the moment comes, run for the trees to the east. Your father waits there." Before Catherine could respond, voices sounded above. Nakohe pressed something cold and metal into her palm, a small knife. "Courage," he whispered, then slipped back toward the cellar doors and was gone. Dawn broke over the mountain, bringing with it a reckoning long overdue. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the cracks in the cellar, illuminating Catherine's prison with thin, golden beams. She sat with her back against the wall, the shackle loosely reattached around her ankle, enough to appear secured if someone checked, but loose enough that she could slip free at a moment's notice. The small knife Nakohe had given her was tucked into her boot, its presence a reassuring weight against her skin. Footsteps creaked on the floorboards above, accompanied by the smell of coffee and bacon. Catherine's stomach growled involuntarily. She hadn't eaten since the meager beans Vance had brought the night before. She closed her eyes, straining to hear the conversation overhead. 2 days at most, Donovan was saying. "Once we've made our point with the Hayes girl, we move on to Anderson Place first," another voice responded, one she hadn't heard before. "That marshal is still sniffing around Tucson. What if he connects Hollister to this?" "That's Hollister's problem," Donovan replied. "Our job is making sure these farmers understand the consequences of refusing to sell." A trap door in the ceiling opened, flooding the cellar with light. Vance descended the crude ladder, carrying a tin plate and cup. "Breakfast," he said curtly, setting the items just within her reach. His eyes narrowed when he saw her, searching for any sign of tampering with the shackle. "Donovan says to keep your strength up. Says he needs you looking healthy enough when he takes your portrait for your daddy." Catherine ignored the food. "Portrait?" Vance's mouth twisted into a humorless smile. "Figure of speech. He's sending your pa a piece of you, remember?" She suppressed a shudder, reaching for the cup instead. The water was cool and clean. They still needed her alive, at least for now. "When?" she asked, working to keep her voice steady. "Noon. Hollister's man is bringing a camera." Vance started toward the ladder, then paused. "Remember what I said. Don't make it worse for yourself." Once he had gone, Catherine examined her surroundings more carefully in the improved light. The cellar was roughly 15 feet square, with stone walls and dirt floor. Shelves along one wall held dusty preserves and bottles. This had once been some family's root cellar. The outside doors Nakohe had used were barred now from the outside, but the wood looked weathered and weak. She ate quickly, knowing she would need her strength. Then she moved around the cellar, testing the walls, the shelves, searching for anything useful. Behind a stack of empty crates, she found a rusted horseshoe. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. She concealed it in the folds of her skirt, alongside Nakohe's knife. Outside the cabin, Sheriff Hayes and his posse had taken positions in the dense forest surrounding the meadow. Through his field glasses, Hayes watched the comings and goings of Donovan's men with mounting frustration. "We should move now," Phillips urged, his finger twitching near his rifle's trigger. "We've got them outnumbered." Deputy Reed shook his head. "Catherine's in that cellar. We can't risk it." Nakohe said to wait for his signal, Hayes reminded them, though every fiber of his being screamed to charge in and save his daughter. "We'll give him until noon." A horseman approached the cabin from the east, a well-dressed man carrying a large wooden box. Hayes recognized the expensive suit and bearing of Hollister's representative. "What's he carrying?" "Looks like a camera," Finch said, squinting. "Jesus, Sheriff, what are they planning?" Hayes's jaw tightened. His worst fears seemed to be coming true. They were going to use Catherine to send him a message, one he would never forget. Miles away in Copper Ridge, chaos had erupted. 2 of Donovan's men had ridden into town at dawn, delivering a blood-stained envelope to Sarah's general store. Inside was a lock of Catherine's hair and a note demanding Sheriff Hayes abandon his pursuit of the Donovan gang. To emphasize their point, they had shot the blacksmith when he tried to stop them, leaving him bleeding on the boardwalk before galloping out of town. Word spread quickly. Farmers and townsfolk gathered, forming a militia determined to rescue their sheriff's daughter. They were led by a rancher named Miller, who had served in the cavalry during the Apache Wars. By mid-morning, 14 armed men were riding hard toward the mountains, following the bandits' trail. Back at the cabin, the atmosphere had grown tense. Hollister's man inspected the dynamite, writing notes in a small leather book. Donovan paced impatiently, pausing occasionally to stare out the window at the surrounding forest. "Something's not right," he muttered to Vance. "Send 2 men to check." "The perimeter again." Vance nodded, gesturing to the youngest bandits. "Lyle, Emmett, make a sweep and keep your eyes open." As the men departed, Donovan turned to Hollister's representative. "How much longer with those calculations?" The man didn't look up from his notebook. "Precision requires time, Mr. Donovan, unless you'd prefer to blow yourself up along with the Anderson farmhouse." Donovan cursed under his breath. "Just hurry it up. I want to be done with this business by nightfall." In the cellar, Catherine had positioned herself directly beneath the trapdoor, the horseshoe clutched in her hand. When the door opened, she would have one chance to strike before they realized her shackle was loose. She rehearsed the move in her mind. Swing hard, climb fast, run for the eastwards. Suddenly shouts erupted above, followed by the pounding of boots across the floorboards. "Fire! The stable's on fire!" Catherine's heart leaped. Nakohe's signal. She tensed, ready to move, but the trap door remained closed as the men rushed outside to battle the blaze. Through the cracks in the floorboards, she could see shadows moving frantically and heard Donovan bellowing orders. The distraction had worked, but she remained trapped below. The outside cellar doors were her only option now. She slipped free of the shackle and moved quickly to the doors, pushing against them. They didn't budge. The bar holding them shut was too strong. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, a soft, scraping sound came from the other side. The bar was being lifted. The doors opened a crack, and Nakohe's face appeared in the sliver of light. "Quickly," he whispered, extending his hand. Catherine grasped it, and he pulled her out into the blinding daylight. Smoke billowed from the small stable 50 yards away, drawing the attention of all Donovan's men. Staying low, Nakohe led her along the cabin's shadow toward the tree line. They had almost reached the safety of the forest when a shout rang out behind them. "The girl! She's escaping!" A gunshot cracked, splintering bark from a tree inches from Catherine's head. Nakohe pushed her forward. "Run! Do not stop!" She sprinted into the trees, pine branches whipping at her face. More shots followed, bullets thudding into trunks around her. She risked a glance back and saw Nakohe had stopped, bow in hand, covering her retreat. An arrow flew, striking one of the pursuing bandits in the thigh. The man went down with a scream that echoed through the forest. Nakohe lost another arrow before turning to run, but he wasn't fast enough. A bullet caught him in the side, the impact spinning him half around. Catherine froze, watching in horror as the Apache staggered but remained standing. Blood darkened his shirt, yet he notched another arrow and fired, buying precious seconds. "Go!" he shouted to her, his voice strained with pain. Instead, she ran to him, ducking under his arm to support his weight. "Not without you." Together they stumbled deeper into the forest, the shouts of their pursuers growing closer with each labored breath. Nakohe guided them toward a steep ravine, each step leaving a trail of blood behind them. "Your father," he gasped, pointing to a rocky outcropping ahead. "There!" As if summoned by his words, Sheriff Hayes appeared on the ridge above them, rifle raised. Behind him, Deputy Reed and the ranchers spread out along the rocks, weapons trained on the forest below. "Catherine!" Hayes's voice carried across the ravine, a mixture of relief and fury. Donovan and his men burst from the trees, skidding to a halt when they saw the armed posse above. For a heartbeat, the scene froze. Catherine and the wounded Nakohe caught. Between the bandits and the lawmen, trapped on the edge of the steep drop. Then Donovan smiled, raising his pistol to aim directly at Catherine's heart. "Throw down your weapons, Sheriff," he called, "or say goodbye to your daughter." The standoff had begun. Time seemed to stretch as Donovan's pistol remained trained on Catherine's heart. The forest fell silent. No bird song, no rustling leaves. Only the labored breathing of the wounded Apache beside her. Blood seeped between Nakohe's fingers where he clutched his side, his face a mask of pain and determination. Sheriff Hayes stood motionless on the ridge, his rifle half lowered, eyes locked with his daughter's across the ravine. Beside him, Deputy Reed's young face had gone pale, while Phillips and the other ranchers kept their weapons aimed at Donovan's men, fingers tense on triggers. "I won't ask again, Sheriff," Donovan called, cocking his pistol with a menacing click. "Drop your weapons, all of you!" Hayes's gaze shifted to Catherine, a silent question in his eyes. She gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. She knew what would happen if the lawmen surrendered. No one would leave these mountains alive. 5 seconds, Donovan continued. 5, 4. Nakohe's weight shifted against Catherine's shoulder. His hand moved to the knife at his belt. 3, 2, wait, Sheriff Hayes shouted, raising his empty hand. "Let's talk, Donovan. Nobody needs to die here." Donovan laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the ravine. "Bit late for that, ain't it? Your Apache friend already killed 2 of my men. And you've killed more," Hayes countered. "The blacksmith in town, Becker in the cave. How many others for Hollister's copper money?" A flicker of surprise crossed Donovan's face. "You know about Hollister?" "We know everything," Hayes bluffed. "The territorial governor's been informed. So is the U.S. Marshal's office. It's over." "Donovan," Quinn stepped forward, his expression troubled. "Jackson, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Donovan snarled, never taking his eyes off Catherine. "He's lying. There's no marshal. We still have the upper hand." In that moment of distraction, Nakohe moved with startling speed for a wounded man. His knife flashed, slicing through the air, toward Donovan. The blade struck the bandit's arm, causing his shot to go wild as he howled in pain and rage. "Run!" Nakohe shouted, shoving Catherine toward a narrow deer trail that descended into the ravine. Chaos erupted. Gunfire exploded from the ridge as Hayes and his men opened fire, forcing Donovan's gang to scatter for cover. Catherine stumbled down the steep path, rocks and dirt sliding beneath her boots. Behind her, Nakohe followed, one hand still pressed to his bleeding side. Bullets whined overhead, splintering tree trunks and kicking up dirt. Through the cacophony, Catherine heard her father shouting orders, directing his men to provide covering fire. She glanced back to see Nakohe slowing, his face ashen. "Keep going," he gasped, gesturing downstream. "Your father will find you." "Not without you," she insisted, returning to help him. The slope was treacherous, the path barely visible among the tumbled rocks and tangled roots. One misstep would send them plummeting to the canyon floor 30 feet below. Together they half ran, half slid down to the stream that cut through the ravine bottom. The water ran swiftly and cold, fed by mountain snowmelt. Catherine helped Nakohe across the icy current, numbing her legs to the knees. "There!" a voice shouted from above. Vance and another bandit had circled around and now stood on the ridge directly overhead. A shot rang out, the bullet striking. Water inches from Catherine's foot. She pulled Nakohe toward a jumble of massive boulders that offered shelter against the gunfire. Behind the largest rock, she helped him sit, his breathing ragged and shallow. "Let me see," she demanded, gently pulling his hand away from the wound. Blood pulsed steadily from a hole just below his ribs. "You need a doctor." Nakohe shook his undead. "No time." He pressed something into her hand, a leather pouch. "Medicine, stop bleeding." Catherine opened it to find dried herbs and a dark resinous substance. Following his whispered instructions, she packed the mixture against the wound, then bound it tightly with strips torn from her petticoat. All the while, bullets continued to strike the rocks around them, showering them with stone fragments. "They're trying to pin us down until Donovan can flank us," Nakohe said, his voice stronger now that the bleeding had slowed. Catherine peered around the boulder. The ravine stretched east and west, its steep walls offering few escape routes. To the west, the sound of gunfire indicated her father and his posse were engaged with some of Donovan's men. To the east, the ravine narrowed into a tight canyon that might offer cover or become a deadly trap. "We need to move," she decided. "Can you walk?" Nakohe nodded grimly, using his bow as a makeshift crutch to push himself upright. "I know these mountains. There is a place, a sacred cave. We can reach it through the canyon." They waited for a pause in the shooting, then darted from behind the boulders, splashing through the shallow stream toward the canyon entrance. Behind them, Vance shouted in frustration, his bullets kicking up spray from the water but missing his targets. The canyon walls rose around them, cutting off the midday sun and plunging them into cool shadow. The path narrowed until they were forced to wade through knee-deep water, the current growing stronger with each step. Catherine supported Nakohe as best she could, his arm draped over her shoulders, his weight increasingly heavy as his strength ebbed. "How much further?" she asked, worry creeping into her voice as she felt fresh blood seeping through his bandage. "Around the next bend," he replied, his words barely audible above the rushing water. "Where the walls open to the sky." As they rounded the curve in the canyon, Catherine gasped. The narrow passage suddenly widened into a hidden grotto. Sunlight streamed down through an opening in the rock ceiling, illuminating a placid pool fed by a small waterfall. On the far side, a dark opening in the cliff face marked the entrance to a cave. "The sacred place," Nakohe murmured. "My people have come here for generations." They had almost reached the cave when a rifle shot echoed through the grotto. Catherine spun to see Donovan standing at the canyon entrance, his arm bandaged where Nakohe's knife had struck, his face contorted with fury. "Nowhere left to run," he called, leveling his rifle. Nakohe pushed Catherine behind him, drawing himself up despite his wound. "You have followed us into sacred ground," he said, his voice carrying a power that belied his weakened state. "This place is protected by spirits you cannot understand," Donovan laughed. "Your spirits didn't help your brother much when I put a bullet in him last winter, did they?" Something dangerous flashed in Nakohe's eyes. "That was your mistake. His spirit guided me to you." The bandit advanced, splashing through the shallow edge of the pool. "Enough talk. Where's the sheriff's daughter hiding behind you?" As Donovan moved into the center of the grotto, something unexpected happened. The ground beneath the pool began to tremble. Small stones clattered down from the canyon walls, splashing into the water. The trembling intensified, and a deep rumbling. Sound rose from the earth itself. "Earthquake," Catherine whispered, clutching Nakohe's arm. The Apache shook his head. "No, something else." Donovan froze, suddenly uncertain, as the water around his legs began to churn. The peaceful pool transformed into a roiling cauldron as pressure built beneath the surface. Before he could retreat, a geyser erupted with explosive force, the scalding water shooting 20 feet into the air. Donovan's scream was cut short as the superheated spray engulfed him. He staggered backward, his clothing steaming, skin blistering from the heat. His rifle forgotten, he turned to flee, only to find his escape cut off by Vance and another bandit who had followed him into the canyon. "Get back!" Donovan shouted to his confused men. "The whole place is coming apart." The tremors increased, rocks now raining down from the canyon walls. Catherine pulled Nakohe toward the cave entrance as a boulder the size of a wagon crashed into the pool, sending waves sloshing over the edges. "Inside," Nakohe urged, pushing her through the narrow opening. "We will be safe here." The darkness of the cave swallowed them just as the full fury of nature was unleashed in the grotto behind them. The last thing Catherine saw before the entrance was partially blocked by falling rock was Donovan and his men scrambling desperately for the canyon exit, pursued by steam and scalding water. Inside, the air was cool and still, untouched by the chaos outside. A faint, phosphorescent glow emanated from lichen on the walls, providing just enough light to reveal a chamber that stretched deeper into the mountain. "What happened out there?" Catherine asked, helping Nakohe to a smooth stone shelf where he could rest. "The hot springs beneath the mountain," he explained, wincing as he settled against the wall. "Sometimes they build pressure until they must release it. My people believe the spirits trigger the eruptions to protect this place from those who would defile it." Catherine glanced toward the partially blocked entrance. "Will they come after us?" Nakohe shook his head. "Not today, but they will return with more men." He met her gaze steadily. "We must move deeper into the cave. There is another way out, one that leads to your father's position." As if to emphasize his words, a distant echo of gunfire reached them through the stone. The battle between Sheriff Hayes's posse and Donovan's remaining men continued somewhere above. Catherine tore more strips from her petticoat to rebind Nakohe's wound before helping him to his feet. Together they ventured deeper into the heart of the mountain, guided only by the faint glow of the lichen and Nakohe's unwavering sense of direction. The real journey had only just begun. The cave's interior grew colder as Catherine and Nakohe ventured deeper into the mountain's heart. The phosphorescent glow of the lichen provided just enough light to navigate the twisting passageways. Water dripped from unseen heights, creating eerie echoes that seemed to follow them like ghostly footsteps. Catherine shivered, not entirely from the cold. "How much farther?" she whispered, helping Nakohe over a fallen column of stone. "Not far," he replied, though pain etched deep lines around his eyes. The wound in his side had stopped bleeding, but fever was setting in. She could feel the unnatural heat radiating from his skin. The tunnel narrowed before opening into a vast chamber where stalactites hung like stone daggers from a ceiling lost in darkness. A shallow underground stream bisected the space, its surface reflecting the blue-green glow of the lichen. Along one wall, ancient paintings depicted buffalo hunts and spirit journeys, testament to generations of Apache who had sought shelter in this sacred place. "We rest here," Nakohe announced, sinking onto a flat stone beside the stream. "The water is good to drink." Catherine cupped her hands, bringing the icy liquid to her parched lips. It tasted of minerals and earth, strange but not unpleasant. She helped Nakohe drink, then checked his bandage. The herbal paste had turned dark, drawing infection from the wound. "Tell me about your father," Nakohe said suddenly, his voice echoing softly in the chamber. As Donovan moved into the center of the grotto, something unexpected happened. The ground beneath the pool began to tremble. Small stones clattered down from the canyon walls, splashing into the water. The trembling intensified, and a deep rumbling sound rose from the earth itself. "Earthquake," Catherine whispered, clutching Nakohe's arm. The Apache shook his head. "No, something else." Donovan froze, suddenly uncertain as the water around his legs began to churn. The peaceful pool transformed into a roiling cauldron as pressure built beneath the surface. Before he could retreat, a geyser erupted with explosive force. the scalding water shooting 20 feet into the air. Donovan's scream was cut short as the superheated spray engulfed him. He staggered backward, his clothing steaming, skin blistering from the heat. His rifle forgotten, he turned to flee, only to find his escape cut off by Vance and another bandit who had followed him into the canyon. "Get back!" Donovan shouted. To his confused men, "The whole place is coming apart." The tremors increased, rocks now raining down from the canyon walls. Catherine pulled Nakohe toward the cave entrance as a boulder the size of a wagon crashed into the pool, sending waves sloshing over the edges. "Inside," Nakohe urged, pushing her through the narrow opening. "We will be safe here." The darkness of the cave swallowed them, just as the full fury of nature was unleashed in the grotto behind them. The last thing Catherine saw before the entrance was partially blocked by falling rock was Donovan and his men scrambling desperately for the canyon exit, pursued by steam and scalding water. Inside, the air was cool and still, untouched by the chaos outside. A faint, phosphorescent glow emanated from lichen on the walls, providing just enough light to reveal a chamber that stretched deeper into the mountain. "What happened out there?" Catherine asked, helping Nakohe to a smooth stone shelf where he could rest. "The hot springs beneath the mountain," he explained, wincing as he settled against the wall. "Sometimes they build pressure until they must release it. My people believe the spirits trigger the eruptions to protect this place from those who would defile it." Catherine glanced toward the partially blocked entrance. "Will they come after us?" Nakohe shook his head. "Not today, but they will return with more men." He met her gaze steadily. "We must move deeper into the cave. There is another way out, one that leads to your father's position." As if to emphasize his words, a distant echo of gunfire reached them through the stone. The battle between Sheriff Hayes's posse and Donovan's remaining men continued somewhere above. Catherine tore more strips from her petticoat to rebind Nakohe's wound before helping him to his feet. Together, they ventured deeper into the heart of the mountain, guided only by the faint glow of the lichen and Nakohe's unwavering sense of direction. The real journey had only just begun. The cave's interior grew colder as Catherine and Nakohe ventured deeper into the mountain's heart. The phosphorescent glow of the lichen provided just enough light to navigate the twisting passageways. Water dripped from unseen heights, creating eerie echoes that seemed to follow them like ghostly footsteps. Catherine shivered, not entirely from the cold. "How much farther?" she whispered, helping Nakohe over a fallen column of stone. "Not far," he replied, though pain etched deep lines around his eyes. The wound in his side had stopped bleeding, but fever was setting in. She could feel the unnatural heat radiating from his skin. The tunnel narrowed before opening into a vast chamber where stalactites hung like stone daggers from a ceiling, lost in darkness. A shallow underground stream bisected the space, its surface reflecting the blue-green glow of the lichen. Along one wall, ancient paintings depicted buffalo hunts and spirit journeys, testament to generations of Apache who had sought shelter in this sacred place. "We rest here," Nakohe announced, sinking onto a flat stone beside the stream. "The water is good to drink." Catherine cupped her hands, bringing the icy liquid to her parched lips. It tasted of minerals and earth, strange but not unpleasant. She helped Nakohe drink, then checked his bandage. The herbal paste had turned dark, drawing infection from the wound. "Tell me about your father," Nakohe said suddenly, his voice echoing softly in the chamber. Catherine looked up, surprised by the personal question. "He's a good man, fair. Became sheriff after my mother died from fever 9 years ago. Said he needed to make the world safer for me." She managed a small smile. "He's stubborn, won't stop until he finds us." Nakohe nodded. "A warrior's heart." "What about your family?" she asked cautiously. His expression grew distant. "My mother was Apache, my father white. a cavalry scout who stayed with the tribe after being wounded. He died when I was young. My mother's brother raised me until the soldiers came and took me to their school. Bitterness crept into his voice. They cut my hair, beat me for speaking my language, taught me to be ashamed of my mother's blood. "I'm sorry," Catherine said softly. "When I returned 5 years later, I was a stranger to my own people. Too white for the Apache, too Indian for the whites." His hand strayed to the scars on his face. "These I earned, fighting those who called me a traitor. Is that why you live alone? Between two worlds?" A wry smile touched his lips. "I track games, read signs, and guide those who pay me. I will survive." He looked directly at her. "But I have not forgotten who I am, or where I come from." A distant rumble interrupted them. Not another geothermal event, but something else. Gunfire, muffled by layers of rock. "The fighting continues," Nakohe observed, struggling to his feet despite Catherine's protests. "We must move. If Donovan's men secure the mountain, they will search these caves." They followed the underground stream as it wound deeper into the mountain. After what seemed like hours, the passage began to slope upward, the air growing fresher. Eventually they reached a chamber where moonlight spilled through a narrow fissure in the ceiling. "Night has fallen," Nakohe said, gazing up at the stars visible through the opening. "We are on the far side of the mountain now. Your father's position is southeast, perhaps 2 miles. Catherine nodded, determination masking her exhaustion. "Can you climb?" Before Nakohe could answer, voices echoed from the passage behind them, rough, angry voices drawing nearer. Donovan's men had found their trail. "No time for climbing," Nakohe said grimly, scanning the chamber for options. "There," he pointed to a narrow crevice in the wall, barely visible in the shadows. "It leads to the surface. You go first." "I will follow." Catherine hesitated. "You're too weak. You'll never make it." "Go," he insisted, pressing his bow and remaining arrows into her hands. "I will delay them." "No." She stood her ground, blue eyes flashing with the same steel her father possessed. "We've come this far together. I won't leave you now." The voices grew louder. They had seconds, not minutes. "Then we make a stand," Nakohe decided, drawing his knife and wedging himself behind a large boulder near the chamber entrance. "When they enter, I will attack from the side. You strike from behind." "That column," Catherine positioned herself as instructed, gripping Nakohe's bow awkwardly. She'd watched him use it, but had never drawn a bowstring herself. The weight was unfamiliar, the tension greater than she'd expected. Flickering torchlight spilled into the chamber as the first bandit appeared. Vance, his face haggard and smeared with grime. Behind him followed another man Catherine didn't recognize, both with pistols drawn. "Spread out," Vance ordered. "They're in here somewhere." The men advanced cautiously, boots crunching on loose stones. When Vance passed Nakohe's position, the Apache lunged, catching him in a chokehold and pressing his knife to the bandit's throat. "Drop your weapon," he commanded the second man, using Vance as a shield. Instead of complying, the bandit swung his pistol toward Nakohe. Catherine stepped from her hiding place and lost an arrow. Her aim was wild. The arrow clattered harmlessly against the wall, but the distraction was enough. Vance drove his elbow back into Nakohe's wounded side, breaking free as the Apache doubled over in pain. "Kill them both," Vance ordered, retrieving his fallen pistol. What happened next stunned everyone in the chamber. A third figure emerged from the passage, Donovan himself, his face and hands blistered from the geyser's scalding water, clothes still damp and steaming in the cool cave air. "Hold!" he commanded, his voice raw. "We need them alive." Vance turned, eyes widening at his boss's ghastly appearance. "Jesus, Jackson, you look half-cooked." Donovan ignored the comment, advancing into the chamber with his pistol aimed at Catherine. "Hollister's dead," he announced flatly. "Shot by the marshal in Tucson this morning. His man spilled everything before they strung him up." The news hung. In the air between them, its implications clear. Without Hollister's protection and payoffs, the bandits were exposed. "What's that mean for us?" Vance asked, pistols still trained on Nakohe. "It means we need insurance," Donovan replied. "The sheriff's daughter buys us safe passage out of the territory." Catherine backed away. An arrow knocked, but her hands trembled too badly to aim effectively. "My father won't negotiate with murderers. He will for you," Donovan countered, stepping closer. "And the Apache comes too. The cavalry's offering a reward for him. Seems they think he's behind some raids near Fort Buchanan." Nakohe straightened despite his pain. "I have raided no settlements. Army—" "And don't care," Donovan sneered. "They just want an Indian to blame." A standoff ensued, tension crackling between them like static electricity. Then, unexpectedly, Vance lowered his pistol. "No," he said quietly. Donovan turned, disbelief etched across his blistered features. "What did you say?" "I said no." Vance's voice grew firmer. "It's over, Jackson. Hollister's dead. The game's finished. Since when did you grow a conscience?" Donovan demanded, his pistol now swinging toward his lieutenant. "Since I watched you murder Becker," Vance replied evenly. "Since I realized we're just pawns being sacrificed, while men like Hollister count their money." The third bandit shifted, uncomfortably. "Vance is right, Jackson. We're wanted men now, no place to run." Donovan's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You yellow-bellied cowards! After everything we've done, you're just giving up?" In the momentary distraction, Catherine caught Nakohe's eye. He nodded almost imperceptibly toward the crevice he'd pointed out earlier, while the bandits argued. They began inching toward it. "We're dead anyway if we try to use her as a hostage," Vance argued. "Hayes will hunt us to the ends of the earth. Then we kill them all," Donovan snarled, raising his pistol. "Starting with you." The shot exploded in the confined space, deafening in its intensity. Vance staggered backward, clutching his chest as blood blossomed across his shirt. He looked down in surprise, then crumpled to the cave floor. Catherine seized the moment of shock, drawing the bowstring and loosing an arrow at Donovan. This time, her aim was true. The arrow struck his shoulder, spinning him around with the force of impact. His pistol discharged into the ceiling, bringing down a shower of stone and dust. "The crevice!" Nakohe shouted, shoving her toward the narrow opening. "Now!" She scrambled into the tight passage, feeling a sharp stone scrape against her skin. Behind her, Nakohe squeezed in, just as the remaining bandit fired wildly into the darkness. The crevice twisted upward, so narrow in places that they had to turn sideways to progress. Catherine could hear Donovan's enraged shouts echoing below, growing fainter as they climbed higher. After several agonizing minutes, the passage widened slightly, allowing them to move more freely. "Almost there," Nakohe gasped, his strength fading with each step. "I can smell the night air." The crevice ended abruptly at a small opening, partially covered by juniper bushes. They emerged onto a steep hillside under a canopy of stars, the cool night air a blessing after the stifling confines of the cave. In the valley below, pinpricks of light revealed a camp, torches and campfires. "Your father's men," Nakohe said, slumping against a boulder. "Go to them." Catherine shook her head, tearing yet another strip from her tattered petticoat to bind his freshly bleeding wound. "We go together." The night wind carried the distant sound of horses approaching from the west, reinforcements perhaps from town. The tide was turning in their favor, but they weren't safe yet. Donovan was still alive, and now he had nothing left to lose. Dawn would bring a final reckoning. The mountainside offered little cover, scattered junipers and boulders against an expanse of loose shale that would betray their movement with noise and sliding rocks. Catherine surveyed the terrain, calculating the safest path down to her father's camp in the valley below. Beside her, Nakohe leaned heavily against a pine trunk, his breathing labored. "We need to move before Donovan emerges," she whispered, slinging the bow across her back. Only one arrow remained in the quiver, precious little if they encountered resistance. Nakohe nodded weakly. "Follow the game trail," he suggested, pointing to a barely visible path winding down the slope. "Animals find the safest way." They set off slowly, Catherine supporting Nakohe's weight as they navigated the treacherous descent. The night had grown colder, their breath forming small clouds in the mountain air. Stars blazed overhead in a moonless sky, offering just enough light to see the path immediately before them. Behind and above, a shout echoed. Donovan and his remaining man had found the cave exit. Catherine urged Nakohe to move faster, though every step clearly caused him pain. The arrow wound had taken its toll. Fever burned through him now, his skin hot to the touch despite the chill. "Leave me," he murmured as they paused behind a large boulder. "I slow you down." "Not happening," she replied firmly, adjusting his arm across her shoulders. "My father taught me we don't abandon those who risk their lives for us." A rifle shot cracked through the night air, the bullet striking stone nearby, sending fragments flying. Catherine pulled Nakohe down as a second shot followed, closer this time. "They've spotted us," she hissed, peering around the boulder's edge. In the faint starlight, she could make out two figures picking their way down the slope, using the same game trail they had followed. "We need to split up," Nakohe said, surprising her with sudden clarity despite his fever. "I will draw them. Away, you reach your father." "That's suicide," Catherine protested. "No." He reached into his leather pouch, extracting a small object that gleamed dully in the starlight, a silver whistle on a leather cord. "This calls to mountain lions. The sound carries for miles." He pressed it into her hand. "3 short blasts. Your father's men will hear. They will come." Another shot rang out, closer still. They had no more time to argue. Catherine took the whistle, then helped Nakohe to his feet. "Head straight down," he instructed, pointing toward the valley. Go east along the ridge. When you are safe, signal." Before she could object further, Nakohe slipped away, moving with unexpected speed for a wounded man, using the darkness and terrain to his advantage. Catherine watched him go, then turned in the opposite direction, picking her way carefully. Down the slope, she had covered perhaps 100 yards when shouts indicated Donovan had spotted Nakohe. Gunfire followed, the shots echoing across the mountainside. Catherine forced herself to keep moving, though every instinct screamed to go back and help. Nakohe had given her a chance. She couldn't waste it. The game trail descended into a belt of dense pines that offered better cover, but made navigation more difficult. Branches whipped at her face, roots threatened to trip her feet. Still she pressed on, guided by the distant firelight of her father's camp. Above and behind her, the pursuit continued. More shots, more shouts, then a scream. Not Nakohe's voice, but another man. Had he somehow turned the tables on one of his pursuers? Catherine couldn't be sure, but hope flickered briefly. The forest floor began to level out as she reached the mountain's base. Through the trees ahead, torchlight flickered, the outer sentries of her father's camp. So close now she quickened her pace, her legs burning with exhaustion. A twig snapped behind her. Catherine spun, knocking her last arrow in a single fluid. Motion, a skill she'd somehow absorbed from watching Nakohe. "Don't move," growled a familiar voice as Donovan emerged from the shadows, rifle leveled at her chest. Blood darkened one sleeve where her arrow had struck him earlier, and angry red blisters covered half his face from the geyser's scalding. "Touch! Drop the bow!" Catherine held steady, the arrowhead aimed at his heart. "Where's Nakohe?" A cruel smile twisted Donovan's blistered features. "Your Apache friend took a tumble down a ravine. Doubt he's breathing anymore." He adjusted his grip on the rifle. "Now drop the bow, or I drop you." "You'll shoot me anyway," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "That's all you know about killing." "True enough," Donovan conceded, taking a step closer, "but I'm offering you a choice in how it happens. quick and clean or slow and painful. Catherine's arms began to tremble from the strain of holding the bowstring taut. She wouldn't be able to maintain the position much longer, and Donovan knew it. His finger tightened on the trigger. A whistle pierced the night. Not the silver whistle Nakohe had given her, but a man's whistle, followed by rustling from the bushes to her right. "Catherine?" called a familiar voice. Deputy Reed stepped into view, his rifle raised. "Catherine, is that you?" Donovan swung his weapon toward the new threat. In that split second of distraction, Catherine loosed her arrow. It struck Donovan in the chest with enough force to stagger him backward. His rifle discharged harmlessly into the air as he dropped to one knee, looking down in shock at the shaft. Protruding from his body, "You!" he gasped, struggling to raise his weapon again. Reed fired, the shot catching Donovan squarely in the shoulder, spinning him around. He collapsed face first onto the forest floor. "Catherine!" Only the young deputy rushed forward, his face a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Thank God! Are you hurt? We've been searching everywhere." She lowered the bow, suddenly overcome with exhaustion. "Thomas, we need to find Nakohe. He's wounded somewhere on the eastern slope." Reed helped steady her. "Your father's organizing search parties right now. We heard gunfire and were coming to investigate." The silver whistle, Catherine remembered suddenly, pulling it from her pocket. Nakohe said to blow 3 short blasts. It would help. The deputy looked skeptical but nodded. "Try it." Catherine raised the whistle to her lips and blew 3 times, the high, keening sound echoing across the mountainside. For several seconds nothing happened. Then from somewhere far above, an answering call came. Not a whistle, but a long, low howl that raised the hair on the back of her neck. "What in God's name was that?" Reed whispered, his rifle raised toward the darkness. "Help," Catherine said. Simply, within minutes they were surrounded by her father's men, led by Sheriff Hayes himself. The reunion was brief but emotional, a tight embrace, eyes shining with unshed tears, before Hayes's professional demeanor reasserted itself. "Donovan?" he asked, noting the body on the ground. "Dead, or near to it," Reed reported. "Catherine got him with an arrow before I put a bullet in him." Hayes's eyebrows rose as he glanced at the bow still clutched in his daughter's hands. "Seems you've learned some new skills." His expression grew serious. "What about the Apache tracker? My men said he was with you." Catherine quickly explained. About Nakohe's injury and sacrifice, pointing toward the eastern slope where she'd last seen him. "He's badly wounded, Pa. We need to find him before it's too late." Hayes nodded, turning to organize search parties. As men with torches spread out to begin combing the mountainside, a commotion arose from the perimeter of the camp. "Sheriff," called a rancher, his voice tinged with alarm, "you better come see this." They hurried toward the disturbance to find an astonishing sight. From the darkness of the forest emerged 3 mounted Apache warriors, their faces painted for battle. Between them, supported on a makeshift travois pulled by a 4th horse, lay Nakohe, unconscious but alive. The lead warrior, a tall man with a single eagle feather in his braided hair, raised an empty hand in greeting. "We heard the call," he said in accented English, gesturing toward the silver whistle still hanging from Catherine's hand. "The medicine whistle. It has not been used in many seasons." Sheriff Hayes stepped forward cautiously. "You know this man?" he asked, indicating Nakohe. The warrior nodded. "He is Wolfsinger, son of my cousin. He has walked between your world and ours." His gaze shifted to Catherine. "You used his whistle. You are under his protection." Catherine moved to the travois, kneeling beside Nakohe's still form. His breathing was shallow but steady. Fresh bandages wrapped his torso. The Apache had already treated his wound with their medicine. "He needs a doctor," she insisted, looking up at the warriors. The lead warrior studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "We will bring him to your healer, but we will stay with him." Sheriff Hayes stepped forward, hand extended in a gesture of peace. "Your people are welcome in my town. I give you my word as the law in these parts." As the unlikely allies moved toward the main camp, Nakohe stirred, his eyes opening briefly. He found Catherine's gaze, a question in his expression. "Donovan's finished," she assured him. "It's over." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before he slipped back into unconsciousness. Catherine walked beside the travois, one hand resting lightly on Nakohe's arm as they descended into the valley. But their journey was far from over. Dawn broke over Copper Ridge, painting the weathered buildings in soft gold light. After 3 days of tension and violence, an unusual calm settled over the town. Outside the doctor's small house, Apache warriors maintained a silent vigil, their presence drawing curious stares from townsfolk unaccustomed to seeing Indians within the settlement's boundaries. Inside, Dr. Wilson carefully changed the bandages on Nakohe's wound. The bullet had been successfully removed the previous evening in a delicate operation that had lasted 2 hours. Now the physician's weathered face showed cautious optimism. "The fever's breaking," he announced to Catherine, who hadn't left Nakohe's side since their return. "Your Apache friend is remarkably strong. Most men would have died from such a wound, and the journey back." "He's not just strong," Catherine said quietly, wringing out a cloth in cool water and placing it on Nakohe's forehead. "He's stubborn," the doctor chuckled. "Reminds me of someone else I know." He patted her shoulder before gathering his instruments. "Call me if there's any change. I need to check on Johnson at the saloon." Left alone with Nakohe, Catherine settled into the chair beside his bed. Exhaustion weighed on her. She'd barely slept since their ordeal began. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Donovan's face, felt the tension of the bowstring against her fingers, and heard the terrible sound of the arrow striking flesh. She had killed a man. The reality of it sat like a stone in her stomach. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Her father entered, carrying a tray with coffee and fresh bread. "Thought you might need this," Sheriff Hayes said, setting the tray on the bedside table. His eyes studied his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "Sarah says you haven't eaten since yesterday." Catherine accepted the coffee gratefully. "I'm not hungry." Hayes pulled up a chair beside her. For a long moment, he simply sat, in companionable silence, listening to Nakohe's steady breathing. "The cavalry patrol arrived an hour ago," he finally said. "Captain Reynolds wants a full statement about Hollister's involvement with the bandits." Catherine nodded absently. "What? About the remaining gang members?" 2 survived. "They've confessed everything, the land scheme, the murders, all of it." Hayes hesitated. "They confirmed what Donovan said about Hollister's death. The territorial marshal caught him trying to flee to Santa Fe with forged documents and a fortune. In cash." "Justice," Catherine murmured. Her father's expression softened. "You did what you had to, Catherine. Donovan wouldn't have stopped until everyone who knew about the scheme was silenced." She met his gaze, her blue eyes troubled. "It isn't just that, Pa. Everything's different now. I'm different." Hayes reached out, covering her hand with his. "That happens when we face death. We see what matters clearly for the first time." From the bed came a soft groan. Nakohe's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on the room around him. "Water," he whispered. Catherine quickly held a cup to his lips, supporting his head as he drank. The doctor removed the bullet. "You're going to be all right." Nako's gaze moved to Sheriff Hayes. "The warriors are outside," Hayes assured him. "Your cousin Red Hawk has been speaking with Captain Reynolds. The army won't be pressing any charges against your people for the raids up north. There's evidence it was Donovan's gang trying to frame Apache." Relief flickered across Nakohe's face before pain drew his features tight again. Catherine adjusted his pillows, her movements gentle and practiced. "I'll let you rest," Hayes said, rising. At the door he paused. "Nakohe, or Wolfsinger, whatever. Name you prefer. The town owes you a debt. I owe you a debt I can never repay." After her father departed, Catherine returned to her chair. "Your people called you Wolf Singer," she said softly. "My Apache name," Nakohe confirmed, his voice strengthening. "It is who I was before the soldiers came." "Is it who you are now?" He considered this, his dark eyes studying the ceiling. "I am both, and neither. Like the eagle that flies between mountain and prairie, I belong to the sky between." Catherine watched him through half-closed eyes. "You have not slept," he observed. "Someone needed to watch over you," she replied with a small smile. "The nightmares?" he asked softly. Catherine looked up, startled by his perception. "How did you know?" "I have killed men," he said simply. "I know the shadow it casts on the spirit." She turned away, blinking back unexpected tears. "Does it ever fade? The feeling that you've crossed a line you can't uncross?" "Not fade," Nakohe replied thoughtfully. "Transform, like a wolf climbing a mountain. Each step changes what he sees, how he understands the valley below." The metaphor hung between them as Catherine considered his words. "I keep wondering if there is another way." "There is always another path," he acknowledged, "but we walk the one before us with the courage we have in that moment." His hand moved to cover hers. "You chose survival. There is no shame in that." Outside the window, voices rose, not in anger, but in curiosity. Catherine peered through the glass to see the Apache warriors conversing with a group of townsfolk. To her surprise, Sarah from the general store was showing them fabric while gesturing animatedly. One of the younger warriors seemed particularly interested, pointing to a red material that matched the color of the sunset. "They're trading," she said with wonder. Nakohe struggled to sit up, wincing with the effort. Catherine helped him adjust. His position to see through the window. "Red Hawk believes peace comes through understanding," he explained. "Trade opens doors between people." For several minutes, they silently observed the unexpected commerce taking place. Then Nakohe turned. To Catherine, his expression serious. "I must tell you something," he said, "about who I truly am." Catherine settled back in her chair, giving Nakohe her full attention. "I was not always a solitary tracker," he began. "After returning from the white man's school, I tried to rejoin my mother's people. But I had changed too much. My thoughts, my words, even the way I walked, all marked me as different." He touched the scars on his face. "These I received defending a cavalry officer's family from warriors who sought revenge for broken treaties. My own cousin struck me with his knife, calling me a traitor to our blood." Catherine listened intently, understanding now why he lived between worlds. "I left the village, wandering for 3 winters before finding work with ranchers who cared. Only that I could track and hunt. I built a small cabin near Crawford's ranch and lived alone," his voice lowered. "Until last winter, when Donovan's gang raided an Apache hunting party. Your brother was among those killed," Catherine recalled. Nakohe nodded. "He had come searching for me, carrying a message of forgiveness from our mother before she died. Donovan's men killed him before he found me." A shadow of pain crossed his features, deeper than any physical wound. "His body was found mutilated in the Apache way, to frame my people for crimes against settlers." "That's why you tracked Donovan," Catherine realized. "Not just for the rancher's reward." "Blood calls for blood," Nakohe said, his voice hardening, before softening again. "But vengeance is a poison that spreads. When I saw Donovan take you, I recognized a chance to right a wrong differently, not through death, but through life." "And now?" she asked softly. "What happens now that it's over?" A complexity of emotions crossed his features. "I do not know. The tribe would accept me back now that I have proven my loyalty. Your father has offered me work as a deputy." His eyes held a question. "What would you choose if the choice were yours?" The directness of his query caught Catherine off guard. Heat rose in her cheeks as she considered her answer. "I would choose neither," she said finally. "I would choose a path where you didn't have to be only Apache or only white, where you could be wolf singer, a man of both worlds." A smile touched his lips, the first true smile she had seen from him. Wisdom from the sheriff's daughter. Catherine returned his smile, conscious of his hand still covering hers, of the current of understanding flowing between them. Outside, the trading continued. Inside, two people from different worlds found common ground in the quiet aftermath of survival. The sound of horses approaching broke the moment. Catherine glanced out the window to see Captain Reynolds and several soldiers riding toward the doctor's house, her father and Deputy Reed following close behind. "The army wants statements," she sighed. "More questions." Nakoe's expression grew serious again. "The truth must be told. About Hollister, about Donovan, about all of it." Catherine nodded, standing to meet the approaching officials. "Together, then." "Together," he agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. The path ahead remained uncertain. But for the first time since her ordeal began, Catherine faced the future without fear. 1 week later, Copper Ridge gradually returned to its normal rhythm, though change lingered in the air like the scent of distant rain. The Apache warriors had departed after 3 days, but not before establishing tentative trade agreements with several merchants. Sheriff Hayes had wired the territorial governor with a full account of Hollister's scheme, prompting investigations into similar land grabs throughout the region. In the small room behind Dr. Wilson's office, Nakohe stood unassisted for the first time since the bullet's removal. His recovery had progressed remarkably, fueled by a combination of the doctor's care and traditional Apache remedies brought by Red Hawk. Now he carefully pulled a clean shirt over his bandaged torso, preparing to face the day ahead. Catherine entered carrying a bundle of clothes, his buckskin jacket cleaned and mended, his moccasins restored with new beadwork by the women of his tribe. "The doctor says you can leave today," she said, setting the items on the bed, "though he insists you shouldn't ride for at least another week." Nakohe nodded, accepting the doctor's verdict without complaint. "Your father has arranged lodging at the boarding house." An awkward silence fell between them, the first since their ordeal. In the safe confines of the sick room, they had spoken freely about their experiences, about her nightmares, about his life between worlds. Now, with his recovery, uncertainty crept back in. "I should let you finish dressing," Catherine said, turning to leave. "Catherine!" Her name on his lips stopped her at the door. "Thank you," she smiled, understanding all that remained unspoken in those simple words. "I'll wait outside." The door had barely closed behind her when Deputy Reed burst into the front office, his young face flushed with exertion. "Catherine," he called, spotting her in the hallway. "Where's your father?" "At the office, I think. What's wrong, Thomas?" Reed glanced nervously at the door to Nakohe's room. "Riders coming. Army patrol from Fort Buchanan, but they're not alone. They've got Lyle Barnes in custody." Catherine's blood ran cold. Lyle Barnes had been one of Donovan's men, the youngest of the gang, barely 20 and new to their operation. He'd escaped during the mountain confrontation, disappearing into the wilderness while the others fought. "What does he want?" "He's made a deal," Reed explained hurriedly. "Testimony against Hollister's remaining associates in exchange for leniency." He lowered his voice. "But that's not all. He's claiming Nakohe was secretly working with Donovan all along. Says the whole rescue was staged to throw suspicion off him." "That's absurd," Catherine exclaimed. "Nakohe nearly died saving me." Reed nodded in agreement. "Your father knows that, I know that, but Captain Reynolds has orders from his superiors. They want the Apache tracker brought in for questioning." The door opened behind them, and Nakohe stepped out, fully dressed. His expression revealed nothing, but Catherine knew he had overheard everything. "We need to find Pa," she insisted, turning to Reed. "How long before they reach town?" 20 minutes, maybe less." Nakohe's hand touched her arm gently. "This was inevitable," he said quietly. "The army has always needed someone to blame. I won't let them take you," Catherine stated firmly. "Not after everything you've done. Taking a stand against the army would only bring trouble to your father and this town," Nakohe reasoned. "I will go with them. Answer their questions. The truth will speak for itself." Catherine shook her head, determination hardening her features. "The truth didn't matter when they took you from your mother. Why would it matter now?" Before Nakohe could respond, Sheriff Hayes appeared at the office door, his grave. "I just heard. Barnes is spinning quite a tale." "It's a lie, Pa," Catherine insisted. "All of it." "I know that," Hayes assured her. "But Reynolds is under pressure. The territorial governor wants this whole mess cleaned up quickly, with clear villains and heroes." He looked at Nakohe. "Unfortunately, it's always easier to blame an Indian than admit white men like Hollister orchestrated everything." "What can we do?" Reed asked nervously, adjusting his badge. Hayes thought for a moment. "Thomas, ride to Anderson's place. They saw Donovan's men days before Catherine was taken. Their testimony could help." He turned to his daughter. "Get Sarah and anyone else who's had dealings with Nakohe over the years. We need character witnesses." Commotion arose from the street, horses and wagons pulling aside as riders approached. Through the window they could see dust rising at the town's edge. "No time," Nakohe said calmly. "They are already here." The small group moved to the front porch of the doctor's office as 6 army soldiers rode into town, flanking a wagon where a shackled young man sat beside Captain Reynolds. Barnes's face was gaunt, but his eyes gleamed with a calculating light as he spotted Nakohe. The soldiers formed a perimeter as Reynolds dismounted, approaching Sheriff Hayes with military stiffness. "Sheriff," he greeted formally, "I have orders to take the Apache tracker known as Nakohe into custody for questioning regarding his association with the Donovan gang." Hayes stepped forward, positioning himself subtly between Reynolds and Nakohe. "On what evidence, Captain?" Reynolds gestured toward Barnes. "This man has provided sworn testimony that the tracker was Donovan's scout for over a year, helping identify vulnerable ranches and homesteads." "That's a damn lie," Catherine interjected, her voice carrying across the now silent street. Townsfolk had begun to gather, drawn by the confrontation. "Miss Hayes," Reynolds acknowledged her with cool professionalism. "Your recent ordeal makes your emotional response understandable." "This isn't emotion, it's fact," she interrupted. "Nakohe saved my life. He was shot protecting me." Barnes leaned forward in the wagon. "That's what Donovan wanted you to think, miss. It was all part of their plan. The Indian was supposed to gain your trust, learn what your pa knew about Hollister's business." Murmurs rippled through the growing crowd. Despite everything Nakohe had done, suspicion came easily to people who had grown up fearing Indian attacks. "If that's true," Hayes challenged, "then why did Donovan try to kill him multiple times?" "I saw it with my own eyes," Barnes shrugged. "Falling out among thieves, the Indian wanted a bigger cut." Reynolds signaled to his men. "Sheriff, I respect your position, but my orders come directly from Fort Buchanan. The tracker will be taken there for formal questioning." 2 soldiers dismounted, moving toward Nakohe. Catherine stepped in their path, her hand instinctively reaching for the weapon she no longer carried. "Catherine," Nakohe said quietly, "let them take me. Fighting will only bring more suffering." "Listen to him, miss," Reynolds advised. "Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." The tension in the street was palpable as more townsfolk gathered. Sarah from the general store pushed to the front, her normally gentle face flushed with anger. "This man has traded fairly with us for years," she called out. "He found the Thompson children when they got lost in that blizzard 2 winters back, carried little Mary 3 miles through snow up to his waist." Others joined in, voices rising. "In Nako's defense, He tracked the wolves that were killing Peterson's sheep, brought medicine during the fever outbreak when the doctor couldn't make it through. Reynolds raised a hand for silence. Your sentiments are noted, but my orders stand. As the soldiers moved forward again, an unexpected interruption came from the edge of town. Hoofbeats pounded on the packed earth as a dozen riders approached at speed, Red Hawk and his Apache warriors, accompanied by a white man in the formal uniform of a federal marshal. The soldiers instinctively reached for their weapons, but Reynolds held them in check with a sharp command. The newcomers reined in their horses, dust swirling around them as the marshal dismounted and approached. "Captain Reynolds," he called, his voice carrying authority. "Marshal James Harrington, I believe you're about to make a serious mistake." Reynolds stiffened. "I have my orders, Marshal." "And I have these," Harrington replied, producing a leather folio containing official documents. Signed statements from the surviving members of Donovan's gang, confessing to all charges and explicitly clearing Nakohe of any involvement. Barnes paled visibly in the wagon. "They're lying to save the Indian." Harrington fixed him with a cold stare. These confessions were given separately, with no knowledge of each other's statements. All match perfectly. He handed the papers to Reynolds. "Additionally, I have a telegram from the governor countermanding your orders. Nakohe is to be released. Into my custody immediately." As Reynolds reviewed the documents, Red Hawk approached Nakohe, speaking quietly in their native tongue. The Apache elder's weathered face showed both concern and pride as he gazed at his cousin's son. Reynolds finally looked up, his expression a mixture of frustration and relief. "It seems I've been operating on incomplete information," he admitted, returning the papers to Harrington. "My apologies, Sheriff Hayes." He turned to Nakohe with grudging respect. "And to you, Nakohe." The soldiers withdrew, taking the protesting Barnes with them. As they departed, Marshal Harrington approached Hayes and Nakohe. "The governor sends his personal thanks for exposing Hollister's operation," he said. "The land deals have been invalidated, and the copper mine will negotiate fairly with all property owners." Catherine moved to Nakohe's side, relief evident in her face. "It's truly over now." "Not quite," Red Hawk interjected, his dark eyes fixed on his nephew. "Wolfsinger must now make his choice." All eyes turned to Nakohe, standing tall, despite his recent wound, a man poised between two worlds. His decision would change everything. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Copper Ridge as the town collectively held its breath. Nakohe stood at the center of attention, the weight of his impending decision visible in the set of his shoulders. Before him stood Red Hawk, representing the path back to his mother's people. Behind him, Sheriff Hayes and Catherine offered a different future, one in the world of settlers, where he had lived as an outsider for so long. "The council has spoken," Red Hawk said in English, ensuring everyone understood the significance of his words. "The ban is lifted. You may return to your people with honor, Wolfsinger." Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Everyone knew what this meant. Reinstatement to the tribe that had once rejected him, recognition of his courage, the chance to reclaim his heritage. Nakohe inclined his head respectfully to his elder. "This is a great honor. You have proven your heart remains true to your blood," Red Hawk continued. "Your mother's spirit would be proud." Catherine watched silently, her expression carefully composed despite the turmoil within. After everything they had endured together, the thought of Nakohe leaving created an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. Yet she knew better than anyone what this opportunity meant to him, a chance to heal the deepest wound he carried. Sheriff Hayes stepped forward, his weathered face solemn. "Nakohe, Copper Ridge owes you a debt we can never fully repay." He extended his hand, offering something that glinted in the sunlight, a deputy's badge. "But if you choose to stay, there's a place for you here. not as an outsider, but as a respected member of this community. The stark choice hung in the air between them, two worlds that had never successfully merged, now both opening their doors to a man who had never fully belonged to either. Nakohe looked from the badge to Red Hawk, then to Catherine, whose blue eyes met steadily across the distance between them. "All my life," he began, his deep voice carrying across the hushed gathering, "I have walked the boundary between two peoples. At the white man's school, I was beaten for remembering my mother's songs. In my tribe's village, I was mistrusted for speaking the white man's words." He touched the scars on his face, a physical reminder of rejection. "I believed this marked me as belonging nowhere. Now I see it differently." Nakohe moved toward Red Hawk, speaking with deep respect. "Uncle, tell our people I am honored by their acceptance. The blood of our ancestors flows in my veins, and I will never forget the wisdom they have passed down." The elder nodded, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. Nakohe then turned to Sheriff Hayes. "And to you, Sheriff, I say thank you for seeing beyond the color of my skin to the actions of my hands." He did not reach for the badge, however. Instead, he looked beyond both men to the horizon, where the plains met the mountains in the distance. "I cannot choose between my two halves. To deny either would be to deny myself." His gaze returned to those gathered around him. "Perhaps the Creator made me this way for a purpose, to stand in both worlds, to help build understanding where there has been fear." Red Hawk studied his nephew with new perception. "What do you propose, Wolf Singer?" "I will build my cabin at Eagle Canyon," Nakohe answered, referring to a location halfway between Copper Ridge and the Apache hunting grounds. "From there, I can serve both peoples, as guide, as translator, as mediator when troubles arise." He looked at Sheriff Hayes. "I will help your law when needed, but I cannot wear your badge." The sheriff nodded slowly, respect evident in his expression as he pocketed the star. "Fair enough. The door remains open." Catherine stepped forward, unable to remain silent any longer. "You'll be alone again." Nakohe turned to her, something warming in his usually guarded expression. "The life of a boundary walker is often solitary," he acknowledged. "But perhaps it need not always be so." The meaning behind his words wasn't lost on anyone present, least of all Sheriff Hayes, whose eyebrows rose slightly before his face settled into thoughtful lines. "Eagle Canyon is only half a day's ride," Catherine observed, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "A distance that can be traveled in either direction," Nakohe replied. Red Hawk surprised everyone by chuckling softly. "My sister always said you were stubborn like the mountain stands against the wind." He clasped Nakohe's shoulder. "Your path is your own to make. The tribe will trade with Copper Ridge through you. Perhaps something new can grow from the blood-soaked ground of our past." Marshal Harrington, who had observed the exchange with interest, stepped forward. "The governor will be pleased to hear this. He's authorized me to appoint a territory liaison to the Apache, someone trusted by both sides." He extended his hand to Nakohe. "The position comes with federal recognition and authority to negotiate on behalf of both parties." Nakohe hesitated only briefly before accepting the handshake. "I will serve truth, not politics." "Wouldn't expect anything less," Harrington replied. With a wry smile, as the gathering began to disperse, plans were made. The Apache would camp outside town for 2 more days, establishing initial trade agreements. Nakohe would travel to the territorial capital with Harrington to formalize his new position before returning to select the site for his cabin at Eagle Canyon. That evening, as twilight painted the western sky in bands of gold and crimson, Catherine found Nakohe sitting alone on the doctor's porch, gazing toward the distant mountains. "May I join you?" she asked, her voice carrying the slightest hint of uncertainty. He nodded, making room on the bench beside him. For several minutes they sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared overhead. "Will you be happy there?" she finally asked. Between two worlds. Nakohe considered her question carefully. Happy is not a word my people use often. We speak instead of living in harmony or walking in balance with the world around us. He turned to face her. I believe I can find that. Balance at Eagle Canyon. Catherine nodded, understanding. You've chosen a difficult path. No more difficult than yours, he observed. The sheriff's daughter who defied bandits and fired arrows to save an Apache's life. A rare smile touched his lips. Your father tells me the town's women are scandalized. She laughed softly. Sarah says I've ruined my chances of finding a proper husband. And what does Catherine Hayes say? He asked, his voice deepening slightly. She met his gaze directly, the same courage that had carried her through their ordeal now evident in her steady blue eyes. She says proper is highly overrated. The distance between them seemed suddenly smaller, charged with unspoken possibility. Around them, Copper Ridge settled into evening routines, lamps being lit in windows, the saloon piano striking up a lively tune, children being called in for supper. Life continued, but somehow irrevocably changed. 3 weeks later, a small gathering assembled at Eagle Canyon, where the clear waters of Silver Creek met the broader flow of the Copper River. A simple cabin of pine logs stood newly completed. On a gentle rise overlooking both waterways, behind it rose the mountains, before it spread the plains, the perfect embodiment of Nakohe's dual heritage. Sheriff Hayes drove the final nail into the porch step, then stepped back to admire the collective handiwork. Beside him, Deputy Reed, the Anderson family, Sarah, and several other townsfolk stood alongside 3 Apache hunters who had contributed elk hides for the cabin's interior. Red Hawk performed a brief blessing ceremony, burning sage and sweetgrass, while offering prayers in his native tongue. When he finished, he presented Nakohe with a painted shield bearing the symbols of both mountain and plain, the mark of a boundary walker. As the visitors began their journeys home, Catherine lingered. Behind, her horse tethered nearby. She and Nakohe stood together on the newly built porch, watching the two groups depart in opposite directions. A new beginning, she observed, her hand finding his between them. Nakohe nodded, his fingers gently interlacing with hers. For all of us. Before them stretched a future neither could have imagined days earlier, uncertain and challenging, but filled with possibility. The boundary between their worlds remained, but it had transformed from a barrier into a meeting place where understanding might finally take root and grow. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting their shadows long across the ground, they stood together, not as sheriff's daughter and Apache tracker, but as two people who had journeyed through fire and emerged transformed. The path ahead was theirs to make. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.